A reading from the Gospel of Matthew. The 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had ordered them. When they saw him, they worshipped, but they doubted. Then Jesus approached and said to them, "All power in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, until the end of the age." When reading this gospel passage, it's very easy to take for granted that we are called to make disciples of all nations. However, in context of the first century, Judaism was more culturally based and something one was born into. So the idea of being a missionary was not a major part of their tradition. Furthermore, if we recall how early Christianity was still a sect of Judaism at the time, the belief in making disciples of all nations would have been a major shift for these Jewish Christians in Matthew's community. As a result, a good question to ask is how this might have occurred. Although we cannot know for sure, it's fairly safe to say that the Apostle Paul was instrumental because of how successful he was at making disciples of all nations, specifically among the non-Jewish Gentiles. Paul was perhaps the most successful missionary to the Gentiles, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say that he influenced others into doing the same. His successes, however, were not without controversy, since he came to the conclusion that following the Jewish law was no longer necessary to be a Jewish Christian. Following the Jewish law would have been the biggest stumbling block for Gentiles, especially with regards to circumcision. Yet these Gentiles were very often at the synagogues because it had a feeling of community that was quite unique in the ancient world. So when Paul decided that these Gentiles didn't need to follow the Jewish laws, he would prove to be very successful. At the same time, however, he would butt heads with apostles like Peter and James, who believed following the Jewish law was necessary. For Matthew's community, they would take the side of the apostles. Matthew makes it abundantly clear that Jesus did not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill them. Clearly, Matthew disagrees with Paul by saying that following the Jewish law was necessary. However, it's extremely significant to note that Matthew agrees with Paul in regards to spreading the message of Jesus to the Gentiles. So although both Paul and Matthew were raised in a non-mission-based religion, the message of Jesus was so great that it could no longer be kept within Judaism itself. It must be spread to everyone. And that's where we come into the equation. Although we might not be called to try and convert others to Christianity, we are called to spread the message of Jesus to the world. Our faith is not simply a cultural religion that can be kept within the confines of Christianity. It must involve making disciples of all nations.